Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So this one's going to be slightly different. In the last video I uploaded how to create components so you can create reusable code and that kind of thing. And a lot of people on Reddit were really happy with that, showing the different ways that you can code in Unreal and how to efficiently do it on a modular level. But one thing I wanted to cover, which doesn't seem to be done enough, is how to use cast nodes, essentially. The catch though with this tutorial is I'm going to show you how to use cast nodes, how they work, and how to think about them, but then also why you shouldn't use them and how you should use something else to kind of get it going and work a different way. It's a bit of a mess, but casting is one of those things that we use for blueprint communication all the time, but there are different ways of doing it that don't restrict your code or what you're able to do with it. So first thing I'm going to do is create a collision cube which our player can run into, and then we're going to use that to talk to other stuff. So let's jump into our blueprints folder. Let's right click, we'll do blueprint class, and let's call this actor BP underscore collision zone. We can then load that up, and we can see here that we can add our components and stuff. If you've been using Unreal for a little while, you know all of this. So we're just going to add a collision. See, we've got a box collision. Let's move it up so it's on the center. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So let's do 60 by 60 by 60. And I'm also going to make sure, if you guys can see it, let's move this along. Just checking the video, that we actually have visible ticked and hidden in game deselected. So what that means is if we jump into our level now, we'll actually be able to see this in the scene. But before we do that, I want to go to our event graph. I want to make sure we got our component selected, so our collision. And then on the right here, we want to do on begin overlap, and we're going to use this. First thing we'll do, we'll drag off and we'll do an equal. And then we're going to do get pawn or get player pawn. Now we'll do a branch, plug that in. Now we're just going to hook up a print string. And what this allows us to do is once we overlap our box, cube or the box is going to check to see if it is our player, which is equal to. If it is, we're going to go to our true channel and then fire our print string. And we'll use this line of code later on to do our casting. Hit compile and save. And now if we drag this into our level, we'll do what everybody else does and put it at the top of the stairs. Now we can press play. And if we run up our stairs, you can see that we overlap our cube. And in the top left there, it says hello. Exactly what we want. Now we actually need something to fire, or at least cast to. And in this case, I'm going to do a little light that we're going to turn on and off once we collide with our box. I'm doing a light because we can duplicate it more and we'll be able to see how this works. So we're going to right click, blueprint class, actor, and then BP underscore light. And with this open, we're going to add a point light component. Yeah, let's just do a point light. And we'll keep this as it is. It should be pretty good. We'll check our intensity and stuff in the level because we might actually have to go brighter. No, that's all right. So now we can go back into our light and we can start setting up our code. So our light is on by default. We know that because we can see it in the scene. So the first thing we're going to do is turn that off. And to do that, we need an event. Begin play, we don't want that. Event actor begin overlap. We're not colliding with the light itself, so we don't need that. An event tick, we're not firing every frame, so we don't need that. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to right click and we're going to create a custom event. And we're going to call this turn light on. What we can do now is drag in a point light reference, so a reference to our component. And then we can drag off and we can search set visibility. And we can use this to turn our light off. So new visibility is disabled. The thing here is that if we press play and we overlap our component, nothing's going to happen apart from it says hello. We're not looking at our light for anything at all. This is where casting can come in to be helpful. So if we go to our collision, first thing we're going to do is remove our print string. And then we're actually going to use our cast node. So we're going to drag off true, then we're going to cast to our BP light. And you can see here, if we drag off our blue pin, we can fire our event that we have created. So turn light on. Let's drag that off. Turn light on. Now, if we hit compile, you see it doesn't work. The thing is, we need an object, and this object wildcard is probably the most confusing thing about cast nodes, especially those beginning or just starting out. And the idea is, what do you use as your object wildcard? That's pretty much the only description that we get. This, when I got started, was probably the most confusing thing about blueprints that I just couldn't wrap my head around until I actually sat down and thought about how these work. And pretty much an object wildcard is, if you're writing a letter and you want to send something to one, this is going to be your address or your mobile number that you send this information to. Get an object. We need to create a reference that we can point to. And in this case, you might be tempted to get our BP light. But if we do that, let's do this, BP underscore light. And you see I've already got it here. So you just do BP underscore light. We can drag it in. And we're saying, okay, we want this cast to go to that light. But if we connect it up and then press compile, you'll see that we get something called a note. This is basically saying BP light is already a BP light. We don't need a cast to BP light. This is really confusing. So what we actually need to do is convert this to an actor. So search actor. We go all the way down and we do object reference, change variable. And then if we hit compile, you'll see that it actually goes away. Because what we're doing is we're getting our light actor, which that's what it actually is in the scene, is an actor, not a light. And then we're casting to that to say turn the light on. So we're going to make this public. And that means in the third person level, I can select our collision box. And on the right hand side here, we can actually select our light blueprint. So if we now run up our stairs, you see once we collide with the box, we're casting the information to it and we're saying turn off that light. We're basically firing this variable. So we actually have this, but now the question is, what if we want this collision box to do more? Let's say we have our player. Once we overlap that, we want to change the color of our body to something else. The reason I'm choosing the player is because I want to show you how to cast to the player itself. So we're going to do third person example project. We will open up our third person character and go over to the event graph. And in here, we're going to create another event called, so we'll do custom event and then set color. Now we're going to get a reference to our mesh. And we're just going to do set material to change that. And if we have a look at our mesh, we have two materials, element 0, which is element 0. And then we're going to connect that up. And we'll select a random material that we have in the level. And let's pick something that's going to look good. Gradient map. Let's see what happens with that. So now we have our set color. We're going to go back to our collision box. And on here, we need to decide whether we want to change our player character and our light, or if we just want to change the player character. And the thing is, with a cast, as long as this has an information and it's cast into the correct place, it'll fire. So in this case, we're going to fire from our cast. So once we change our light, as long as that's got a reference, we're going to go through and then we're going to change our player's color essentially. So we're going to cast to, it will be our third person character. And then we can drag off, we can do set color, which is the name of our custom event. And you might notice that we've got a object wildcard. It's exactly the same. If we plug in an actor though, so let's do a new actor and we'll just drag it in there. You'll see that it works, but we need a reference. Well, we don't want to select the player because we're using a game mode, so the player spawns at start. So what we can do in this case is we can actually search for our object directly. And in this case, our player, so third person character, is parent class character. And because we know we've only got one in the level, we can drag off and we can search get player character, and then we can cast to it. So we can hit compile and save. And now we can press play and run up the stairs, and you see that turns the light off and it changes the color of our character. But you might notice that we're adding casts for every single thing that we want to do. This is not going to be very useful if we have more than one thing. So I'm going to delete that random event. And one thing I want to show you as well is, let's say we have our third person character, but we don't want our light to turn off. If we jump back into our blueprint or our scene, we can select our object. And let's say we remove our light, our BP light. We'll just set this to clear. And then we jump in. Don't see any difference. But if we run upstairs, you'll see that now nothing happens to either of them, which is not what we want. We want our character to still change color. And if we leave, surprised I didn't come up with any errors actually, then we can go to our collision, and you'll see that our code's still exactly the same, but this time, because we don't have a reference, our cast's failing. So what this essentially means is casting is perfect for sending information to one object. If you know there's something very specific you need to send information to, or change or update in that information, then a cast node can be excellent for that. Best way to do it is probably actually convert one of these to a convert to pure cast. And what that means is it removes the event, and you're then positive that no matter what happens, this cast will always have the correct variable or the correct object going into it, and it's never going to change. So that's what you kind of need to think about. Personally, I think if I can use a pure cast, then it's solid. Then you don't need to worry about it, and it's great for casting to the player to change information. But what happens if we want to actually do this? Let's say we want to control what changes color and what goes where. So we're actually going to use something called an interface. It's just a little bit easier to work with. And I think covering casts, I want to show you the difference between the two. So remember, we're locked to each one of these. So casts, we've got to have a specific cast for a specific thing. We're now going to delete these, and the reference, we'll be using them in a little bit. And we're going to go to our third person example, and we're going to create something called an interface. So we go to blueprints. You'll see here we have a blueprint interface. Let's call this the BPI underscore. Let's think of like a global name that we can use for everything. Let's say activate. So if a blueprint says activate and the reference is there, we're going to turn it on or off. So we jump in here and we can go over our functions. I have already done a video on creating interfaces in a little bit more depth. So if you want that, check the link in the corner and in the description for that video, as we go over a little bit more with line traces and how to do more communication. A little bit of a puzzle style thing. So, functions. This is better to think of as an event. Think of this as what you're going to fire. So event, it's not going to be an event. This is going to be called our activate. So once this is fired, we're going to say, do something. Doesn't matter what it is. Click compile. And now in our third person character, we're going to replace our set color with our activate node. And before we do that, we want to go to class settings. And on the right here, we want to add our new interface. So BPI underscore activate or active. And what that does is it actually gives us our interface, and you can see here we've got our stuff. But what we can do is we can compile. We want to right click, and remember I said think of these as an event. So we're going to search event and then activate. And you can see here we have our event activate, and the target is BPI activate, our interface. You get this little message or blueprint icon in the top right. That's when you know you've got the right one. So we've got our activate event, hit compile and save. And then we want to do the same thing with our light. So class defaults or class settings, add interface, BPI underscore activate. And we want to make sure we hit compile And then we can delete our turn light on. We can search activate, and we want the event. We can then plug that in here. And now we hit compile and save. We can go back to our collision zone. And if we pressed play actually in the scene, you'll see that nothing happens because we're not firing that event. But what we can do here is we can get a reference to those actors in the level, and it doesn't matter what order we put them in. And you see here, we've still got our actor blueprint. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to rename this to actors to activate. So you'll see here that we've got one blueprint. I'm actually going to convert this to an array. And what that'll do is allow us to select multiple actors in the level. I can then drag off a reference to it. We'll do a for each. Yep, we'll do a for each loop, and we'll plug that into true. And what we can do now is we can get this array element, and we can search for our activate. So if we drag off, search activate, and you see here we've got activate message. That's exactly what we want. An interface is essentially sending out a mass text, if you'd like, and if there is a reference to it, it'll pick it up. It's the easiest way to decide how to do it. So we've got our actors, and now what we can do is we can select our stuff in our scene. And you see now if we press compile and save, we get our actors, and we've got the option to actually add stuff, but because we made this public, we can choose it from inside of our level. So in this case, our player isn't spawned, otherwise we could add that to our list at runtime. And then what we can do is we can actually point this to both of those actors. So you can see we've got actors to activate. Let's add 2 because we've got 2 in the level. We have our light and we have our player. And now we press play, we can run up the stairs, and you see that it does exactly what we had with the cast, except it's a little bit more efficient. Now, rather than adding another cast node, which we would have had to do, we can drag this around. We can have a load of these. So we've got another 3. Let's pick our blueprint. Let's add another 3. Doesn't matter what order we've got it in. And then we can run up and turn it on or off. And this is where the power of interfaces come in handy compared to casting. So casting is fantastic if you have one actor you specifically want to set data for. If you have multiple, or if you've got a chain of stuff, then interfaces are the better way to do it. It's basically a way to control stuff. And what this also means is we have this actor here. We could then drag it around to this side. And if we have this one over here, we can use this to control separate things. So let's clear this list of arrays. We can set that. And we can press play. And then if we run up, we'll turn these lot off. And then if we hit this one, we'll turn this lot off. We could go ahead and we could create another blueprint. So actor, BP underscore cube. Let's change the color of a cube. We go to our event graph. Actually, first we need to add a cube, which would be very useful. Cube, event graph. And then let's say we have our activate again. So we go to class settings, add BPI underscore interface or activate. We make sure we compile first, otherwise we won't be able to find our event. And then we do event activate. And now we can tell this actor to do something the exact same way. Otherwise, we would have had to add another cast node casting to the BP cube. So that would have been 3 cast nodes with all the wildcard references. Whereas now you don't actually need to do that. We can drag in a reference to our cube. We could even do on this one a flip-flop. So we set material. So the first time we overlap it, we change our material to red. And then the second time we go over it, we set our material to, let's do orange. We can make sure our target is correct. And now we just need to drag that into our level. And we can hit play. So now if we run upstairs, we have one collision, which changes the color of our character and turns our lights off. And then this one, at the minute, will only change those lights off because I forgot to set the reference. But if we choose our collision, we go to our objects, select our cube. We can then run up, and then we can change the color of our cube. And then if we run back through it, didn't do anything. And I realized it didn't do anything because we set it to the same color. So if we go back, now I've changed it to a white. We can press play. You can go up, and we turn those lights off. Then this one we turn to red, and then we go back through it, it goes back to white. And the best part of this, we don't need to cast to multiple different things. So if we want both cubes or both collisions to activate this, we can select that one. We can add it to our list of actors. And now when we run up the stairs, it turns red. And when we run through this second one, it turns to white. And then back and forth. So a way to think about this is, let's say you have a level with a room, the door's open, and you want specific things to happen in a specific order. You could say the door's open, the lights turn on. After the lights turn on, we activate the enemies through a delay, as long as they're pointed at the correct thing. And then you could have the player start, or you could play a cinematic. And then that's the kind of thing that you can do with this. It's quite powerful. So that's basically how to use casting and how it's stuck to basically one object. Well, that's the better way to think about it. But there are alternatives out there to make your code easier to use and cleaner. And this is the same thing. I could just keep going all day and duplicate these and have this cube added in specific to control that one. And then this one to control it as well. And go through like so. This one's went on a little bit longer than I'd like to. But I just wanted to show you how to use Blueprint casting and how there is actually an alternative out there which most people don't know about to using it. I think this is probably going to be very helpful to those just getting started. And I'd like to leave you with the thought of, in your head, think about what you don't need to cast to. Like if you're casting to something, can it be done with an interface instead? Literally, like if you're casting to an actor, or if you're going to cast to multiple, then interfaces all the way. Like just interfaces are life and love. Just use them when you need to in replace of a cast node. So I hope this helped. A big shout out to everyone on my Patreon right now. Awesome stuff. And everyone in the Discord as well. We're well above 800 subscribers. So if you need any help with anything, then head on over there. There's a link in the description. And yeah, I'd love to help you out. Just drop me a message. Be awesome. So stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.